I see John just started the recording, so we are recording now. This is a session at Lake ECMECC on broadband options for students and families in East Central Minnesota, and we will get started in just a couple of minutes. Hi, Dakota. Greetings, John. And Dean and Joshua and Marlena and Mary, who were already on before. Welcome. Hey, Bill. And Amanda.
And Amanda. Is this based on a lot of the data that we've already talked about at our tech coordinator meetings?
Yeah, we'll talk about that, but we're going to talk about other stuff too, other options and what, things that you might look at as a district moving forward.
Sorry.
All right.
I'm going to give it another minute yet for see if anybody straggles in. All right, I think we'll get started. It's officially afternoon now, so I can say good afternoon. Hope you had a good morning, couple of good sessions, and ready for a few more this afternoon. Most of you, I think I know most of you, and you probably know I'm Marc Johnson, the Executive Director of ECMECC. And I'm also the broadband guy for this East Central Minnesota region. I've been with ECMECC for going on 13 years now. And for about that same amount of time, I've been involved in rural broadband efforts throughout this region and around the state, but largely this region: Kanabec County, Mille Lacs County, Pine County, Isanti County, Chisago County, really covering all of our area. And we've been, working diligently over that decade or so to try to get better rural broadband options, and we've had some successes, and we still have a lot of pockets of our area that are underserved or unserved, and that really came to light during the spring distance learning period. And so what I hope to talk about is some things we found, some lessons we learned from that, as well as some things that we can look at and that we can do and that you can do in your district with your families, that we can work together on as a region. And so that's some of the things that I hope to do. I'm also on the state governor's broadband task force representing education across the state. And what I talk about today really applies statewide, especially in the rural areas. The urban areas have another issue. It's not access as much as it is affordability, and we'll talk a little bit about that too. Again, I know most of you, so I don't know that we have to do introductions, and in a virtual sense, it's not as much something that you do, but you can feel free in the chat window if you want to say something about what district you're from for everybody else, so they kind of know what district you're from, and what is something that you're hoping to hear or learn or talk about, and I'll kind of look at that, and Nicole is here to help me kind of monitor the chat a little bit too. We'll kind of look at that and make sure that we try to answer those questions as we move along this afternoon. So feel free to use the chat for that. Feel free to use the chat to ask a question, or because it's a small group, you just unmute and interrupt me. Feel free to do that. I know that wasn't on John's etiquette list to do that, but I'm very comfortable if you have something you want to say to do that. So, all right. Otherwise, we'll move forward. I think everybody can see the handout. That handout's been linked in the chat. There's a PDF version of it on the schedule that you can download, and all the links work. Or you can do the Google Doc. That's been shared out, and I know Nicole has put that link in the chat, and probably will again in a minute, so that everybody's able to see that. When distance learning started, it was interesting because every district, when they had to go, all of a sudden we're thrust into this, we have to do distance learning. And for years, literally years, we've been telling legislators and other people and saying, you know, broadband is important. It's important for education. It's important for healthcare. It's important for work at home. It's important for all of these things, trying to get them to the legislature to put some dollars behind finding a solution to get broadband out to everybody. And it took a pandemic to prove that we were right about the importance of broadband. And we saw that in education. We saw that from work from home, and people who were either able to or not able to work from home, including obviously our own families in our districts. We saw that in medicine, in telemedicine, the fact that people could do, people were encouraged to do doctor visits, remotely, but if they don't have the broadband capabilities, they're not able to do that. So the pandemic really brought that to light. And when everybody had to start planning in the middle of March for distance learning, every district asked a question in some kind of a survey that you all sent out that asked something about broadband, but everybody asked it in a different way. Some people said, do you have broadband? And of course, I might have, as a parent, I might have said, yeah, I have one of these, right? And because I have one of these, I have the internet, right? So I answer yes to that question. Is that really what they need to be able to do distance learning? Okay. We found out that probably not was the answer to that question. So as a region, one of the things that we did at ECMECC was say, we should ask this question after we get started, right? After distance learning gets started, let's ask some questions of our families again, only let's ask the same question of everybody. So every family gets the same set of questions, and we can put that data together and we can talk about some things. So we did. And so in April and May, after people had started their distance learning, we did a family survey that went out to our families, and we had over 2,000 families in 12 ECMECC districts respond, and that represented almost 19,000 students, because most families had more than one student, some of them many. And we again asked a series of questions. We had a really, that being a high return rate, it was a very good margin of error and confidence level. And these are some of the things that we found. And I'm just going to go over them really quickly. Some of you have seen this before, but not everybody. We had about 6% of the families say they do not have internet access at home for distance learning. And most of those had cell phones based on other questions they answered. But they either the students didn't have them, or the parents had them, the students didn't, or they just could not be used for distance learning. And we also found out that that was not a great solution anyway. But that would represent in our region about 11 to 1,200 students that had nothing, okay? No usable internet access at all. We asked about devices, and that was, we didn't learn that wasn't as important a question as it turned out, but we had 9% that said they did not have enough devices for their students to participate. 16% indicated that some kind of cellular service was their only internet access. That could be hotspots, or they could be just had been using their phone to share. They may have had a hotspot specifically designed for that gets cellular service, or they may have been sharing their internet connection from their phone. And that's a pretty high. That's a pretty high number. Again, we're getting up close to 3,000 students, and we found out that that's not a great solution. This next one was the one to me that was most interesting. I won't say alarming necessarily, although a little bit, but it was most interesting. We asked people, how satisfied are you, given that you're doing distance learning, how satisfied are you with the internet service you have for distance learning? In other words, the idea behind that was, if they answer, it's on a Likert scale, 1 low, 5 high. If they answer 4 or 5, they didn't have any problems. They're not going to say they're highly satisfied unless they had problems. The 3s are really a gray area. You're not sure what's going on there exactly. But if you say 1 or 2, so if you're moderately or highly dissatisfied with it, you're probably having some major problems. And that number came out almost 26%, which is getting close to 5,000 students throughout our region. And that's a high number. And we looked with that data, we had also asked a number of questions, or we also offered the opportunity for them to provide comments. And we looked at the comments that went along with those answers of highly dissatisfied. And it was pretty evident. We also asked them to do speed tests. That was another thing. And I'm not going to get in the weeds on the technical bits about that. But what we found was a lot of correlation between people who commented that the internet was too slow, they couldn't participate in video with their teachers, they had 3 students and only one of them could work at one time, they did their speed tests, they had really slow upload speeds, there was lots of correlation behind that, which basically said that 26%, they have internet service. So if you ask them, do you have internet service as a district, they probably said yes. But they probably weren't very successful with distance learning. So it's kind of a hidden group. And I've been pumping this information to everybody who will listen in the state about that, because when MDE came out with their number of students, and I think it was around 20-some thousand students don't have internet access, they asked a single question of districts. They said, districts, tell me how many of your families don't have internet access. And they didn't give any guidance for districts on how to answer that question. And my contention was they didn't hear about this 26% of students who don't have access. They missed that entirely. And that group of students wasn't able or won't be able to participate successfully in full digital distance learning. So I've been, and as a district, everybody in your districts, you need to know you likely have the numbers across that's an aggregate number across all our districts. The percentages ranged from somewhere around 15% to as high as 35% among our districts. But a 25% average is pretty accurate. So you have those students in your districts. So when you start out school, and many of you will probably start with students in school, but you are going to have a percentage of your students who are going to opt out, right? The families are going to say, I'm not sending my students into school. I want to do a distance learning option because we are required to provide that. So a group of those students are not going to have adequate internet access to do distance learning unless we find some kind of a solution for them. And that was the, I mean, that was the eye-opening piece of that survey that we did. Then there were a number of other things, and I'm not going to go over them, that you can kind of take a look at. There's some information on the free response comments that we had. As you can see from that, that you're looking at right now, 30% of the comments, almost 30% of the comments talked about slow internet. That's a pretty good correlation with the ones who were highly dissatisfied with it. So no secret, no secret there. There were a lot of really overall positive comments too, and I want to make sure that I point those out. I think there's a couple of them here that you can read, and you can go back and look at this yourself and read it too. And we also have a document that gets into more of the comments. And so if anybody's interested in that, let me know, and I'll make sure that that I provide that to you. I'm just taking a quick look at the comments. Okay. So that was the survey that we did, again, in April and May. And we learned, like I said, we learned a fair number of things about it. That most importantly, we learned that we have a lot of students who might answer yes to the question about internet, but who really probably aren't going to be successful. Any questions or comments about that piece? Because I'm going to move on to what we do. What are our potential solutions for this? Anybody? Okay, so on the document, the next thing that I have is Office of Broadband Development. So if the Office of Broadband Development was put into place probably 8 years ago or so, it's out of the Department of Employment and Economic Development, the DEED department, and their job is to work on the rural broadband issue. And the legislature has, over the years, some years given them some money to provide grants to providers to build out internet to areas. So there's been some success there. There's also federal programs that have happened that have incentivized providers to build out more internet, and I'll talk about one of those in just a moment. But the Office of Broadband also provides a lot of information that helps us know where the problems are so that we can advocate for those areas. And that link is there for you, and it takes you to this page right here. And there's a section called Maps and Data. And if you go to Maps and Data, there's all kinds of stuff there, and I'll just show you real quick one or two of these. If I go to, let's see. So this is a pretty common map that's used for a lot of things that says, here are the areas of the state that have wired broadband service of at least 25 megs down and 3 megabits up. Basically, this is the map that shows where people will probably be successful with distance learning. And if I zoom in on our little section of the state, you can see there's a lot of white there, and that's not what we want. Okay, so those areas that are not in white are probably areas that are going to be tricky. And as you look at that map, I imagine you see some areas where a lot of your students live. I should try to shrink it down just a little bit. We can get the top part of the, oops, that was too much. All right. Anyway, yeah, we're in kind of a bullseye. And you can see other parts of the state. Southwest Minnesota is a problematic area as well. But you can see at the Office of Broadband, there's all kinds of maps about that, with that information. One of the things that I was going to say that I didn't, about the current state of available services, that map helps you see that. You could probably tell from that map that the areas that were covered with that service are mostly around our towns, right? They're around our communities. And that is because in town, generally our families have a lot of options. They have wired service from what you would call the traditional cable provider, the old cable TV providers, which are now mostly broadband providers. So your Midco, or used to be Mid-Continent, SCI Broadband, which is Savage Communications, and then you have your traditional phone companies who also have, are now in the broadband business more than anything else, and that would be like CenturyLink, Frontier, Benton Co-op over in the Malacca area. So they are providing pretty good service in our towns and communities. And I'll come back to another part of that. And you also have really good cellular coverage in the towns and in the communities. And the way cellular works is the closer you are to the cell tower, the better your broadband capabilities are going to be with your cell phone or with a hotspot, like a MiFi or a Jetpack or one of those kinds of things. And in town, generally, we're all close to a cell tower. You get out a little further and you're further away from a cell tower. You might be able to make calls, but your internet access and that you can get because you're that far away from the tower is very, very limited. So when you get out into the rural areas, that's what you're faced with. You're a long ways from a cell tower. There are some fixed wireless providers like Genesis Wireless in this area and others. But again, you have to be close to one of their access points, which is not necessarily a tower. It could be a silo or top of a tall flagpole for that matter. They put their access points wherever they can. But you have to be close enough to it, and you have to not have trees in your way for fixed wireless to work. You have satellite service. Satellite gets to everywhere, supposedly, but you have to have line of sight to the satellite. You have to have the right equipment. And satellites, if you didn't know, are a long ways away. So you have to get that signal back and forth, and that's not easy. And it really hampers the upload speed. And I've talked about that a couple of times. You can hear me say more about that in a little bit. So out in the rural areas, that's all the white areas that you saw on that other map. There's really limited service. And so what do we do about that? We keep working with the Office of Broadband. We keep working with the legislature. We keep working with the providers to try and provide better service. And one of the things that has happened recently in the last couple of years is CenturyLink and Frontier, the traditional phone companies, have received subsidies from the federal government through a program called Connect America, the Connect America Fund. They've received subsidies to build out service. And there are some areas in in those white areas that you see where people can get better broadband service. The problem is that program, that federal program, only required the providers to provide 10 megabit down and 1 megabit up service. And again, I'm trying not to be too super technical, but if that doesn't mean anything to you, here's something that maybe will mean something to you. To be able to participate in something like we're doing right now with these video calls for a virtual conference, you need an upload speed of probably at least 1.5 megabits to be fully participatory, to get good quality, have it not break up on you all the time, and things like that. And the same download. And download's not always the issue. It's the upload part that's the problem. So what we say in what we've been trying to educate people on is, in the broadband world, download speed is about consumption. It's about watching things. It's about getting information to you. So, watching an educational video or Netflix, downloading a file of some kind. Upload is the productive side. That's you being able to be productive. So in upload speeds, you're talking about, can you participate in a video conference? Because to participate, you need to be able to talk and ask questions and be participatory. Can you upload files back to a teacher or to a doctor or to your employer? And that upload part is productivity. And the federal requirements for the build out that Frontier and CenturyLink did were so low that they weren't productive. And so they don't show up on that map that you saw because they don't offer the upload speed. Sometimes they can offer the download speed, but not even that, mostly. So that has been a problem, and we've been working with the providers to try to get them to fix that. That service is also distance dependent. So if you're lucky and you're close to if you go out and you look on your roads, if you're in rural America and you're driving, you see these pedestals. Sometimes they're gray, sometimes they're white, and they have, look like they might have wires going into them and things like that. Those are the telephone companies' pedestals, they call them. And where the main ones are, sort of, there's main ones and then there's secondary ones. The secondary ones are outside your house. The main ones are on the corners of road intersections and places like that oftentimes. And if you happen to live close to one of those, you might get good speed. If you are a mile down the road, your speed degrades quickly. So that explains why your quote unquote neighbor who's a half a mile away might get better service than you do. And I'm telling you all of this to help you understand what our families are going through. Okay, they don't understand this, and there's no expectation that they would. So we say, so when I'm talking to somebody, and I talk to lots of people about this because they get a hold of me, and they say, yeah, but so and so gets great speed and I can't, and they're mad as heck about that. And I say, it's all about distance. You are further away than that person up the road. And that doesn't help them get better service, but it helps them understand. And then you start looking, for other options. I'm going to pause for a minute because that's the technical side of this presentation. Thankfully, that's done, right? And see if anybody has any questions yet. I'm going to go back while you're thinking of them. I'm going to go back to the Office of Broadband site, and there's this little piece called data, and I'm going to click on that. And good. Okay. So because the next thing I'm going to talk about is, okay, what are resources that are available to help families find service of some kind, right? And in some cases, they just need some kind of service. It might end up being subpar, quote unquote, but if we can just get them some service, they can at least participate to some degree. And there are lots of resources available for that. So at the Office of Broadband, I went, and I'll back up so I show you how I got there. Back on this main page that's linked off of our handout. Oops, not that one, off of this handout. Actually, the second bullet is the broadband provider information, and I just went to maps and data, and that's what would come up if you chose that. And here they have a list of broadband providers by school district. So if I look at the PDF version of that, and I find the first one for us, which would be, keep scrolling, sorry, you get dizzy, be Bram, would be our first one. Bram, not quite there yet. Belgrade, Bemidji, et cetera, et cetera. There's also a spreadsheet of this one, so you don't have to scroll everywhere. Oh, I'm close. Oops, I missed it. Where'd it go? Bram, there it is. Excuse me. So there is every provider, as you can see, the section starting here. I'll highlight it maybe. Go down to here. Oops. I got one of Brainerd's there. But those are all the providers that provide service somewhere in the Bram School District. It doesn't mean that every one of these is available to everyone, but it's a place to start. If you're trying to help a family figure out what options they have for broadband, if you're in Bram, and again, every one of your districts is here, you can go and get this list, and you can see, at least a website so you can point them in the right direction. Again, not available to everybody, and the speeds that they have on the, I am pointing at it, but you can't see that, on the right-hand side are theoretical highest possible speeds. In most cases, they're not going to reach that, only in certain instances. But you can see that you have your mobile providers, your AT&T, Sprint and T-Mobile are together now. Verizon, those are all listed and their websites are listed. You have your wireless like Genesis Wireless. CenturyLink and Genesis have some fiber, but it's very, very limited. But it's listed there because it is one of the things. And you have your satellites, your HughesNet and your Viasat satellite services, as well as your, CenturyLink and Mid-Continent, who are available with high speeds in town. But this is one resource, okay, that's available, and that's on the handout, and it's at the Office of Broadband. Another, let's see, here it is. So you have a link, I'll put that, a link here on the guide or on the document that is the ECMECC District Broadband Guides. Oops, that goes to a folder that's here, and every one of your districts that's an ECMECC district has a broadband guide. These were done, a couple of years ago now, almost. And they're being updated right now. So probably within 2 weeks, there will be new versions in here. But if I go to, again, I'll use Braham as the example just because I'm here. Each one of these is customized for your district. So it's something that you can distribute to your families. And again, this one is okay, and we're going to do an updated one that's better. But it'll tell a little bit about what I've been talking to you about broadband so that families can understand a little bit more about it. It'll list the providers, and this comes really from that list that I just showed you, along with their web links. This is a map that says kind of what you can expect to get for service in different parts of the district. And I've tried with these maps to zero in on the district so that people can kind of understand what's available to them in various areas. I will update these maps because a few things have changed in the last 2 years. Then here's sort of some information for people to understand what kinds of speeds they need to do various things. Again, to help people understand. The low-cost plan piece is something that I have to work on. And this addresses not the access issue as much as it does the affordability issue. And that's another huge piece of this puzzle, is that our families can't afford access. To be honest, when you're in the rural area, you pay more because you don't have competition to drive the price down. So your satellite services, your fixed wireless services, even some of your cell, services in those areas are more expensive than what people have to pay in town where there's more competition. So many providers have discount plans. Lifeline is one of them, and that plan still exists, but the discount might be different now. And so your phone companies, CenturyLink and Frontier, generally participate in the Lifeline program, but that's income dependent. So the family has to meet income guidelines, and they're pretty low. They have to be pretty low to meet it. Mid-Continent, the cable provider in town, is offering a couple of things, and they're not necessarily the ones that are shown here. They do have their Lifeline program, and I want to say that's around $6 a month for a family to get 25/3, which is adequate for distance learning. And then they have a $15 a month plus taxes that is not income dependent, that a family can just say, I can't afford it, I want to sign up for this plan. And that's available, again, to our Midco communities, which is not everybody, say East Central, Isle, I know you folks are on the call. or on the in the session. You're Savage Communications or SCI, so you don't have Midco available to you. We've been working with SCI to see if we can find similar options. And as we do, we will put these in these guides and we will get that information out to you. And we're also working to find more public access areas that are available. The libraries are generally available, for parking lot, quote unquote, parking lot Wi-Fi. I know some of the schools, I know East Central was talking about having some parking lot Wi-Fi available. That's another potential.
It's being installed this week.
It is. Okay, very good. So that's another potential solution. We don't, we like that as a last resort because we really don't want to force families or students to drive somewhere to be able to do this. But if we can provide better service that helps them be more participatory in their learning, then that's a good thing. And so we are looking at town halls in townships. We're looking at community centers for our tribal community centers as a potential. We're looking at, as Bill said, East Central's installing some in their parking lot. I know Mora put some on the side of their building by their parking lot. So we're looking at those as potential solutions as well. That's some of the things that are going on and some of the resources that you have to provide to your families. I'll pause again to see if we have any questions. Or comments. Okay, providing a little bit of wait time there. The next and kind of the last thing I want to talk about is, I think, really exciting and I think still really relevant. We started talking about this concept among in the broadband world, among circles of people who deal with this issue. We started talking about a concept called the digital navigator. And you'll see a couple of links on the handout about that. I can go back to that. So there's, and that's a concept that was sort of developed by the National Digital, NDIA, National Digital, I'm going to figure it out because I'm going to go look at it. All of a sudden I blanked on National Digital Inclusion Alliance. That's what it was. National Digital Inclusion Alliance. And their concept was that, like we have in our schools, we have career navigators now. Some, guidance offices, personnel in the guidance office are being rebranded as a career navigator to help students identify and navigate that concept of careers. You help them do an inventory of their skills, an inventory of their interests. You help them pick classes that meet those interests and skills. You help them understand what their next steps are, to whether it be military or college or trade school or whatever. And that's sort of a navigation piece. You obviously have people that help students navigate mental health issues. You have people who help families get the resources that they need for that, whether it be mental health. You have that happens in special education. That happens in all kinds of aspects of education. And so the concept was, do we need that for the digital world? In other words, helping families and students understand, why is it important to be connected? How does that help you? Educationally, work from home, quality of life, telehealth, there's all kinds of things that go into it. But for education, we were thrust into that situation of, oh my gosh, it is super important. Everybody has to have this, or they can't learn. And there was some education we had to do with families about that, about what, and we had to make accommodations. We had to send paper things to people who just couldn't get access. That made a lot of work for all of you that are teachers, and it made a lot of work for the district, and it was expensive, and it changed the effectiveness sometimes of what you were trying to do when you could do digital things with one group but not with another. So perhaps we need some folks to help get families connected, or help them understand what their options are, or understand what their situation is so that we can do the right accommodations for them, whatever that happens to be. Understand what's causing the roadblock. Is it affordability? Is it a cultural issue? Is it a language barrier? Is it any of those things? Is it just access? They just can't get it where they are. And so help them understand what is possible, what are options for them. And there's a job description, and I have that template for that that you can see, and that's a very basic template. But we talked about that, and at the same time, there was some private foundations that were working to raise money at the time, they were thinking they were raising money to buy hotspots to give to kids because that was the answer, right? In our area, we know that's not the answer. Some of you did that. And for some people, if you're close enough to a cell tower and the conditions are right, it is an answer. But for a number of our students, it was not. And we brought that up to people and said, and I used the statistics that I had and said, look, this is not going to solve the problem for a big number of our students. We have to look for other options. We have to talk about other things. And long story short, a lot of communication with this group that was raising funds, and we almost got them to take the digital navigator idea statewide, but they didn't have quite enough money to do that. So they are providing competitive grant opportunities for regions of the state to apply, groups of schools essentially, to apply for funds. And ECMECC is going to apply for a grant. And I think our chances are pretty good, like no guarantees, but I think our chances are pretty good to stand up a digital navigator project. We think it still has a lot of relevance, even though many of our students are coming back to school. We know that we may have to pivot at any moment very quickly to a hybrid format or a distance learning format. Plus, we know that we're going to have students who choose not to come back and are going to need a distance learning format. I was talking to a superintendent, one of our superintendents in one of our larger districts just the other day, and their estimation was that 10%, at least 10% of their students would choose distance learning over coming back to school if that were the two options. And I don't know if any of the rest of you know about your districts or not, but I felt like that probably was, from a couple of other things I've heard, that was probably a fair assessment. So if you're a district of 1,000 students, you can figure you have 100 students who are going to stay home, and we have to provide education to them at a distance, and digitally is probably the most efficient way to do that. So we think that the digital navigator concept is going to be relevant through the rest of this year, if not beyond. And so we're going to put in an application to stand up this program. And what this is going to mean is that your district is going to have somebody that they will assign. So it needs to be a local person who knows the community, knows the families a little bit, has some rapport in a sense, because you're part of the school. So it'll be a local person who will have some responsibility to do this, and you will receive support. You'll receive those people will receive training, support, additional, layers. In other words, like a second level. Okay, we're having a real problem with this one. Help me out. And so you'll get somebody who'll be able to help you with that, who has expertise around the state and the region, and some funding, for the districts to help fund that person, probably for some time spent outside of the day, reaching families who are working and not available and during the day, things like that. And then some funds to provide technical solutions when we talk about trying to put access into locations that someone would have to go to as a last resort. So some funds for some things like that. Those kinds of things are Band-Aid approaches, but right now we need some Band-Aids so that we can, get to the next level. But that is something that we're working on and that we expect to put an application in for that. Those applications are due at the end of the month, end of August. We will start standing up that program well before that because we feel like we can do it without the funding on a more limited basis, but there are things we can do at the beginning to get ready for it, that when the funding comes, we'll be able to put it into full motion, because we know we're going to need to have some of these solutions by the beginning of September. So that is our idea of a digital navigator. And I'm curious if anybody has any thoughts or comments about that, or anything we've talked about today. I've been yakking like crazy for 40 minutes. I think I can stop the presentation now.
Okay.
Bill.
One thing I'm looking at doing at East Central is we're going to be adding more outside access points to open up those outdoor learning areas more.
Yep.
So I've got a plan right now to add up to 10 more outdoor access points around the outside of our building.
Awesome. That's a good idea. And I know a couple other districts have started that process too, which is great. The libraries have access points too. John, I have an emergency tower. Is that the Armor, the state communications tower, John? And we have had some conversations. Those are tough to get on because of all the regulations associated with it. But we have certainly talked about that as a potential solution. We have to get a provider who can provide that service, but it's definitely being talked about. I see a question from Jenna about getting more fiber optics in our area. There's absolutely, and here's the issue when I talk about providers again. So when I was talking about that federal program, the Connect America Fund program that had the low requirements, but Frontier and CenturyLink took that subsidy and they built service. They did put more fiber in, but only to nodes. And then from those nodes, it goes out, and then that's where that distance dependent piece was. And the service degrades quickly when you get past that node. But having that fiber to those nodes is a good thing if we can just get them to look at applying for one of the federal grants, one of the state grants, to continue that out further from those nodes. So we're working with the CenturyLinks and Frontiers to try to figure out, how to do that. But we need their help. They have to be willing to do that, and that means they have to invest some of their own money because the grant doesn't provide all of it. The grant provides up to 50%. So trying to get them to do that, or we have to find another provider who wants to come in and compete, and that's really difficult as well. But those are all things that we're talking about, more long-term solutions than what we're, than some of the short-term solutions we're talking about. But absolutely, that is one of the potential long-term solutions. Anything else? Or other questions you have? You can chime in or you can put them in the chat. Yeah, I know Mary's still on. I see your question from before about, students with poor quality internet or no internet due to poverty. Yeah, and that's where some of these Lifeline and other programs I think are going to be good solutions for those students. And we're going to make sure that we get that information to all of our districts so they can share that with their families, so families know about that. I will say that, like, the in-town, those students in town, we were really surprised. Cambridge Isanti did a survey, reached out to their families, and they did a good job at the beginning of identifying families who didn't have service. And they had addresses and names of the families and so on. So I worked with them to take those addresses and we put them on a map, and we showed that surprisingly, probably 30% or more of those families were actually in Cambridge or in Isanti, and found out that was an affordability issue. for those families. And so Midco stepped up during that distance learning period to offer free access to families, and they got a lot of families signed up for that. And now they've turned around and they've come back with, we can't expect them to do it for free forever. I mean, they're a business, they can't give things away forever. But they've come back with a real nice program that's affordable. And it's too bad that doesn't reach out to the rural areas. So we got to work harder on the rural areas, but we have some things that some of those families can partake of that will help.
Thank you.
Yeah. So if there are more questions, I'll stick around. Please ask. Otherwise, we're up to about 10 to 1, which is about our time limit. I certainly appreciate it. I hope there was a little information shared that was useful to you. And make sure if you're concerned about this and concerned about your students, talk with your administration about it. They will know that we're working on this program. So you'll hear more about the digital navigator piece. And if you have questions, by all means, call us. I'm kind of the broadband guy for this area, so I'm very, very happy to field calls and questions that you might have or that your families might have. So thank you, and have a good rest of the afternoon at Lake ECMECC.